Hello, students. So as part of our unit on argument, covered in Chapter 8 of Denise Comer's textbook, we're going to talk about logical fallacies. These are one of my favorite things to teach. I think they're really helpful training people in critical thinking practice and really helping you exercise your mind. So I hope you will enjoy them a little bit as well. So here's an example of a logical fallacy. So if you stop and think about this for a moment, you maybe will recognize that the sample size is much too small. The name for this logical fallacy is hasty generalization because someone is in a hurry. They are coming to a conclusion without consulting nearly enough evidence. They're jumping to a conclusion. In science, we refer to the sample size being too small. So that's hasty generalization. Here's another example of a logical fallacy. Now, when you first see this one, you may think to yourself, no, that's true, exercise is good. But it's an example of a logical fallacy because it doesn't offer any qualifications. So there are circumstances where exercise is not good. If you have just had quadruple bypass surgery, your surgeon is not going to recommend that you go out and run a marathon, right? So it's much more accurate to say that exercise is generally good. Exercise is good if you meet the right requirements and if you're careful in the way that you do it. So that's unqualified generalization is the name of that fallacy. This one is a little dated now. Barry Bonds holds the all-time career home runs record for Major League Baseball. He is not in the Hall of Fame, even though he's been retired long enough to be admitted there. The reason this is a logical fallacy is because it focuses on Barry Bonds' personality rather than his performance as an athlete. So the name for this fallacy is ad hominem. It's a Latin phrase for to the man. So instead of evaluating what he accomplished in his career, this person is arguing that his character, that his morality should keep him out of the Hall of Fame. So this is an example of a fallacy that distracts from the argument and brings up something that should not have deciding power. So even if Barry Bonds was a jerk, that should not rule out his inclusion in baseball's Hall of Fame. This one might make you giggle a little bit. It's an example of a straw man fallacy. So just like a scarecrow is meant to look like a human body, but it's actually far less complex. We have structures and organs and systems underneath our skin. Scarecrows just have stuffed straw underneath their clothes. So in the same way that a scarecrow is a very reductive, simplified version of a human, you've committed a straw man logical fallacy if you take somebody else's argument and you misrepresent it as being way too simple, if you reduce it down so far that it's not really a truth. So you're misrepresenting someone else's position by presenting a version that's much too simple. Politicians do this all the time. Anytime you hear one politician summing up another's position on a complicated issue, there's a really good chance they're going to drift into straw man territory. Now, the name for a logical fallacy like this is post hoc ergo propter hoc. The thing to notice is that item A happens first, and then item B happens. So I eat crepes, and then I ace my French test. My brain decides, well, the crepes must be the cause for my great performance on the French quiz. That is a logical fallacy. That kind of breakfast does not directly translate into great performance on my French test. Another one of these that I like a whole lot is when people say things like, we probably shouldn't take Bill on our picnic. Every time we take Bill on a picnic, it rains. Therefore, Bill must be the cause of the rain. So even if Bill does seem to have really bad luck, if you stop and think about it, he's certainly not causing the rain. Um, the name for this one, another Latin phrase, ad misericordiam, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But one thing you might see there is the word misery. This is emotional manipulation, and that word misery helps me remember that. Um, so whether or not you graduate should not influence whether you've done enough work to pass a class. You have to pass a class before you graduate. Graduating on time cannot justify receiving a passing grade. So it's kind of backwards. And the student is trying to get the teacher or the professor to feel pity or to empathize with their situation, when really the passing or the failing of the class should come down to performance on assignments. This next one picks up on kind of a similar train of thought. So this person is kind of spiraling. They're imagining that one negative outcome will lead to a whole bunch of others in rapid succession. I like the name for this one. It makes sense to me. Slippery slope, suggesting that if our feet slide out from under us and the grass is wet and the slope is steep enough, we might slide all the way down to the bottom of the hill. But in this case, it's just simply not true. So lots of people have taken an extra semester or an extra year to finish college, and they have still ended up getting a great job and lived happy and fulfilling lives. So we have to be careful not to let our imaginations run away with us. I heard things like this from my football coaches. There's a real temptation to compare sports to war, especially a sport like football. But of course, it's not, right? Warfare is much more serious, dangerous, and lethal than football. As dangerous as football is, it's really nothing like war. So this is an example of a logical fallacy called false analogy. We compare one thing to another, but if we really think about that analogy, it breaks down pretty quickly. So despite what your coaches may do to try to encourage you, sports and war are pretty different. Now, this is a logical fallacy because someone else almost certainly would have eventually figured out the double helix structure of DNA. So we call this hypothesis contrary to fact. It just assumes that the person who did something, if that person had not done it, it never would have happened. Another version of this is if Abraham Lincoln had not freed the slaves, we might still have slavery today. Well, almost certainly not, right? There was a tremendous amount of momentum behind the abolitionist movement. If it hadn't happened under Abraham Lincoln's presidency, almost certainly would have happened later. So if you've never met Katie, and before you get a chance to, I tell you that you won't like her because she's a snob, what I've done is poison the well. Before you can taste the water for yourself, I have biased you in a particular way. So the name for this one, poisoning the well, it's an attempt to influence somebody's opinion before they have any real evidence about the decision, about the argument. I didn't give a specific example for this one because I thought the pattern was worth emphasizing. So the basic setup for this logical fallacy reduces a whole bunch of choices, a whole bunch of possibilities down to only two. So you're either with me or you're against me. It's that kind of argument. And it's called a false dichotomy or a false dilemma. It reduces the whole realm of choices down to two. Whatever you might think to put in that blank, there are probably a lot of nuanced positions in between being fully in favor and being completely opposed. And it's also possible that somebody could be a bad person for another reason other than not being in favor of the thing you're in favor of. So if I am in favor of equal pay for women, but I also burn acres of the Amazon just for fun, I'm still a bad person. This last one, if you're curious about it, you can go and Google South Park episode Chewbacca Defense, and you'll see a clip from the show South Park demonstrating the Chewbacca Defense. It's also called the red herring, and really it's just an attempt to distract. So it's a little bit like some of the earlier ones we saw where misdirection is involved. The person making the argument is trying to pull your attention away from the things you should be paying attention to, and distracting you with something else. So just like the Barry Bonds one, the ad hominem, a person might try to distract you with a look at a person's character rather than the objective things they accomplished over their career. So ad hominem, Chewbacca Defense are related in that way. So that's all that I have. I hope you will take some time to really think about these and not just to look at the answer and move on. Because if you don't challenge yourself, if you don't let your mind try to figure out how some of these fallacies operate, where they go wrong, you won't develop that particular facility, that faculty in your mind.